The wind howled across the endless prairie like a wounded beast, carrying with it the sharp sting of dust that bit into Willa's scarred cheek. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the rickety wagon lurched to a stop before the weathered ranch gates. This was it. The last chance for a forsaken widow whose own blood had cast her aside. One wrong look from the giant who owned this land, and she would be turned away once more, left to wander the frontier with nothing but her battered valise and a heart heavy with broken dreams. The driver muttered something about, "Not much hope here for the likes of you," but Willa lifted her chin, her full figure trembling not just from the cold but from the weight of every cruel whisper that had followed her across 3 counties. She stepped down carefully, her sturdy boots sinking into the dry earth. The air smelled of sagebrush, leather, and distant rain, a raw, honest scent that promised both danger and possibility. There he stood, a towering silhouette against the vast sky, the giant cowboy named Silas. He didn't move at first. His massive frame, easily over 6.5 feet of solid muscle and quiet strength, seemed carved from the mountains themselves. If this tale of quiet strength and second chances touches your heart in any way, perhaps you might like it. Subscribe for more stories like this, and leave a comment below sharing what forever means to you. Willa's hands tightened on the handle of her valise. The scar on her face pulled tight as she forced a small, hopeful smile. She had come here seeking honest work, any work that would let her keep body and soul together. The advertisement had been simple. Ranch needs capable woman for housekeeping and help with young ones. No mention of marriage, no promises of love, just work, and work she could do. Her big-sized frame had never been delicate, but her hands knew how to mend, to bake, to bring order from chaos. Silas finally stepped forward, his boots making the ground seem to sigh under his weight. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he gave a single slow nod, a subtle character behavior that carried more weight than any grand gesture. His piercing blue eyes swept over her without pity or mockery, just a steady appraisal that made her breath catch. The sun was dipping low, casting long golden shadows across the ranch yard. A specific sensory moment came when a soft breeze lifted the scent of fresh hay and wood smoke from the distant cabin, wrapping around Willa like a hesitant embrace. It reminded her of better days, before the accident, before the betrayal. In the quiet of her mind, a deep emotional reflection stirred. How many times had doors slammed shut because of her size, because of the jagged scar that marred her low-epte cheek from the carriage wreck that took her first husband? Society had deemed her unworthy, a forsaken widow, whose own family had turned their backs when the inheritance dried up. Yet here she stood, hoping against hope that this silent giant might see past the surface to the resilient heart beneath. Silas gestured with one enormous hand toward the simple ranch house in the distance. A quiet warmth beat in the way he did it, patient, without rush, as if giving her time to decide if she truly wanted to stay. Another small warmth came when he reached down and effortlessly lifted her heavy valise with those calloused fingers, carrying it as though it weighed nothing. The third warmth beat arrived as he paused at the porch steps, waiting for her to walk beside him, rather than ahead or behind, treating her as an equal from the very first moment. Inside the modest kitchen, the space felt surprisingly welcoming despite its bachelor sparseness. Willa noticed the faint layer of dust on the table and the unwashed dishes in the basin, signs of a man who tended his land and livestock but neglected the softer comforts of home. Her homemaking instincts stirred, even though this was only supposed to be about seeking work. "You Willa," his voice, when it finally came, was a low murmur, deep and gravelly like distant thunder rolling over the hills. It was Tia questioned, so much as a confirmation. She nodded, her hazel eyes meeting his. "Yes." "Willa." Mort answered the advertisement for work. Silas set her valise d'Ove kept no carefully by the door. He didn't smile, but there was something in the way his broad shoulders relaxed, just a fraction that spoke volumes. The children, his young niece and nephew, she remembered from the letter, were nowhere in sight yet. but she could feel their curious presence somewhere in the house, watching. As evening settled, Silas showed her the small room prepared for her. It was simple, but clean enough. A single warmth beat lingered in the air when he placed an extra blanket on the bed without a word, noticing perhaps how the prairie chill had followed her inside. Willa's quiet reflection deepened as she stood alone for a moment. This giant of a man had not laughed at her appearance. He had not sneered like the townsfolk back east. Instead, his stoic presence offered a fragile thread of hope. Could this be the new beginning she desperately needed? Or was she walking into another cruel twist of fate? Later that evening, as they shared a simple meal of beans and cornbread she had quickly prepared to show her skills, Silas ate in silence. His subtle behavior, pushing the last piece of bread toward her plate, sent another small wave of warmth through her chest. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, painting the rough log walls in dancing light. Willa felt the slow burn pull of the place, settling into her bones. The ranch house, though plain, held the promise of order she could bring Vekepite hat, her capable hands. She moved about the kitchen afterward, washing the dishes with quiet efficiency, the warm water soothing her travel-weary fingers. Silas watched from the doorway, his massive frame filling the space without crowding it. He didn't offer words, only that steady presence that made the room feel safer than any she had known in years. Outside, the prairie night wrapped the land in velvet darkness. Crickets sang their lonely song, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. Willa stepped onto the porch for a breath of air, the wooden boards creaking under her weight. The ranch gates stood tall against the stars, their iron bars etched with years of wind and rain. She wondered what lay beyond them, now that she had crossed this threshold. Silas joined her, leaning one broad shoulder against the post. The subtle character behavior repeated itself. He simply stood, offering space rather than demands. A third small warmth beat bloomed when he pointed silently toward a faint light in the bunkhouse, as if to say the hands would not bother her. Her emotional reflection returned. Softer this time. Perhaps, in this quiet corner of the world, her big-sized form and scarred face would not be the first things people saw. Perhaps Silas's stoic silence was the beginning of something kind. Yet, as the night deepened, two ranch hands passed by the porch on their way to the barn. Thinking themselves out of earshot, they murmured low voices that carried on the breeze. The boss really going through with that old joke? Bringing her here like this? Willa froze, her hand tightening on the railing. What joke? The words hung in the cool air, unresolved and sharp. Silas's jaw tightened beside her, his massive frame shifting ever so slightly, but he said nothing. The tension coiled tight in her chest, a sudden revelation that this new beginning might carry shadows she had not foreseen. Why had those men spoken of an old joke? And why did Silas' protective stance suddenly feel like both shield and secret? Silas's jaw tightened beside her, his massive frame shifting ever so slightly, but he said nothing at first. The ranch hand's words lingered in the cool night air like a thorn lodged deep, their low murmurs fading into the darkness as they disappeared toward the barn. Willa's hand remained frozen on the rough porch railing, her scarred cheek burning not from the wind but from the fresh sting of uncertainty. What old joke? The question pressed against her ribs, threatening to spill out, yet she held it back, unwilling to shatter the fragile thread of hope that had drawn her here. Silas turned toward her then, his piercing blue eyes steady in the starlight. A subtle character behavior spoke louder than any words. He reached out with one enormous calloused hand and rested it lightly on her shoulder, the touch brief yet grounding, as if to say the shadows would not claim her tonight. It was not pity, only quiet assurance from a man whose presence alone could quiet storms. They stepped inside together, the wooden door creaking softly behind them. The kitchen fire had burned low, casting a warm amber glow across the pine table, where their earlier meal had been cleared away. Willa moved to the hearth on instinct, adding a fresh log kept hot hands that still trembled faintly. The specific sensory moment arrived as the flames caught, releasing the rich, earthy scent of pine resin and faint hickory smoke that curled upward, mingling with the lingering aroma of cornbread and filling the room with a comfort she had not known in years. It wrapped around her full figure like an old quilt, softening the edges of her doubt. Silas settled into a chair by the table, his towering build making the sturdy oak seem small. He did not press her, only waited kept hath that stoic patience that had marked him since her arrival. In the quiet of her mind, a deep, emotional reflection stirred. How many nights had she lain awake after her first husband's death, replaying the moment her own blood family turned their backs? Her brother and sister-in-law, the very ones who had once called her sturdy and reliable, had sneered when the carriage accident left her widowed and scarred. No man will want a woman like that. They had whispered in the parlor, their voices carrying through the thin walls, as if she were not there. The inheritance from her late husband had been small, swallowed quickly by debts, and when it vanished, so did their kindness. They had packed her belongings and sent her away with a single train ticket, mocking her size and the jagged mark across her face as proof she was unfit for anything but pity. Betrayed by blood. Those words tasted like ash even now. Willa poured 2 cups of the strong coffee she had, sake pete warm on the stove, her movements deliberate and practiced. She set one before Silas, the steam rising in lazy spirals. A small warmth bloomed in the simple act, the way he accepted it with a single nod that carried gratitude deeper than speech. Another followed when he pushed the sugar tin toward her without asking, remembering perhaps how she had sweetened her own cup earlier. The third warmth came softer still in the way the firelight played across his weathered face, highlighting the silver threads in his dark beard and reminding her that this giant of a man had not yet judged her. She sat across from him, the chair creaking under her weight, and the words began to slip out in fragments, murmured rather than spoken. My family, they didn't wait long after the accident. Said Mort was too much trouble. They kept hot this scar and all, called me a burden in their own home. Her voice stayed even, but the quiet reflection deepened inside her chest. She had tried to be the strong one, the widow who baked for neighbors and mended clothes for their children, yet they had laughed behind her back. Forsaken, one cousin had sneered at the funeral, loud enough for the whole town to hear. Who'd marry a big woman marked like that? The betrayal had cut deeper than the carriage wheel that scarred her, leaving her adrift until the advertisement for this ranch had appeared like a distant lantern in the fog. Silas listened without interrupting, his blue eyes never leaving hers. He murmured low, "Ain't right," the 2 words gravelly and short, carrying the weight of mountains. No long speeches, only that authoritative presence that made the kitchen feel smaller, safer. The fire popped softly, sending sparks dancing up the chimney, and Willa felt another layer of the slow burn connection settling between them. Her homemaking hands had already begun to bring order here, dishes washed, floors swept, but tonight the real work was this sharing, this peeling back of old wounds under the gentle light. Outside, the prairie wind whispered against the windows, carrying the faint lowing of cattle from the distant pasture. Willa's hazel eyes met his, again, searching for any sign of the old joke the hands had mentioned. Silas's jaw worked once, as if he might speak more, but instead he rose and added another log to the fire himself, his massive shoulders flexing with effortless strength. The gesture sent a 4th quiet warmth through her, though she had only counted 3. This one unexpected, like a promise unspoken. They sat longer than either planned, the clock on the mantel ticking steadily. Willa spoke of the small things next. How her sister-in-law had sold her late husband's tools without asking, claiming it was for the best, and how her brother had refused to let her stay even 1 extra week, once the money ran dry. Mocked me at the supper table, she murmured, tracing a finger along the scar on her cheek. Said no decent man would look twice. Yet Silas did not flinch. His stoic silence wrapped around her story like a shield, turning the echoes of betrayal into something she could almost set down. A small warmth lingered as he refilled her coffee without being asked, the pot heavy in his large hand, yet handled with care. Another came when he leaned back, the chair groaning under his frame, and simply listened as if her words were the most important thing on the ranch that night. The third arrived, in the way the fire's glow softened the lines of his face, making the giant cowboy seem less like a mountain and more like a man who understood loss in his own quiet way. The hour grew late, the house settling into its nighttime rhythm with kept it hot, soft creaks and sighs. Willa stood to clear the cups, her full figure casting a long shadow across the floorboards. In that moment, the emotional reflection crested gently. Perhaps here, with this silent protector, the forsaken widow could find a place where her sighs and scars were not weapons turned against her. Silas rose too, his boots heavy on the planks, and walked with her to the hallway leading to the bedrooms. The children's doors remained closed, but she sensed their young ears might have caught fragments of her tale through the thin walls. At the threshold of her room, Silas paused, his subtle character behavior repeated. He placed that large hand briefly on the doorframe, not blocking her path but standing as a quiet sentinel between her and the world outside. "Rest now," he murmured, the words carrying the same authoritative calm that had steadied her all evening. Willa nodded, the scar pulling slightly as she offered a small, grateful smile. The betrayal by blood still echoed faintly, but tonight it felt a fraction lighter, shared in the glow of pine-scented fire and steady blue eyes. She stepped inside, closing the door softly, yet sleep did not come easy. The ranch house held its breath around her, the distant sounds of night creatures filtering through the window. Hours later, in the deepest part of the night, a soft knock sounded on the front door. Willa stirred, heart quickening. Silas, heavy footsteps crossed the floorboards, and low voices drifted from the porch. Another ranch hand, urgent and hushed. She rose and cracked her door just enough to hear. "Boss, that letter from town, the one about the widow, it's from her kin. They recommend to check on her, saying they heard about the arrangement." The words hung unresolved in the dark hallway, a sudden revelation that twisted the knife of old betrayals anew. Silas's frame filled the doorway as he turned back inside, his expression unreadable in the lantern light. Why were her blood family arriving now? And what did they know of this so-called joke that the hands had whispered about? The tension coiled tighter in Willa's chest, the new beginning suddenly shadowed by ghosts she thought she had left behind on the prairie road. The lantern light flickered as Silas stepped out onto the porch to meet the late-night visitor, his towering silhouette momentarily blocking the doorway before the heavy door clicked shut behind him. Willa stood frozen just inside her small room, her back pressed against the cool wood, the overheard fragments about her kin arriving, and the mysterious arrangements swirling in her mind, like dust devils on the prairie. Her heart beat heavily in her chest, the old fears of betrayal by blood rising up again to choke her. She closed her eyes, willing herself to breathe slowly until the low voices outside faded, and Silas's heavy footsteps returned across the floorboards. Dawn broke with a soft golden light, filtering through the thin curtains the next morning. Willa rose before the roosters, determined to channel her restless energy into something useful. If her family was coming in a few days, she would not let them find a neglected, dusty bachelor's home. This was her chance to prove her worth through the one thing she trusted, her homemaking skills. Tying a clean apron around her full waist, she set to work with quiet resolve, her big-sized figure moving vekepite, hast purposeful grace through the ranch house. She began in the kitchen, the specific sensory moment, arriving powerfully as she heated water on the stove and added a splash of vinegar and a few drops of precious lemon oil she had brought in her valise. The sharp, clean citrus scent rose up, cutting through months of bachelor neglect and filling the air with the promise of renewal and care. She scrubbed the pine table until it gleamed under her strong hands, her arms working in steady rhythm, the jagged scar on her cheek pulling slightly with each determined stroke. The floors were next swept, mopped, and polished until the wood shone with a warm luster. Silas appeared in the doorway mid-morning, his piercing blue eyes taking in the transformation. His subtle character behavior spoke volumes. He did not interrupt or offer empty praise, but simply rolled up his sleeves and carried an extra firewood, stacking it neatly by the stove. The sight of the giant mountain man performing this small task for her sent a quiet wave of warmth through Willa's chest. She spent the morning baking. The yeasty aroma of rising dough soon filled the house, drifting out the open windows and across the ranch yard. 3 small warmth beats unfolded throughout the day. The first came when she offered Silas a thick slice of fresh, warm bread with a bit of butter, and he accepted it with a slow, appreciative nod, his large hand making the bread look tiny. The second arrived when little Elias, Silas's young nephew, shyly crept into the kitchen, drawn by the smell, and Willa handed him a small piece without a word. The boy's eyes lit up for the first time. The third warmth beat was softer, more private. She discovered a small posy of prairie wildflowers left on the windowsill, placed there silently by Silas while she worked. In the quiet of her mind, a deep emotional reflection stirred as she worked. Despite her unconventional appearance and the way society had mocked her size and scar, here in this ranch house, her hands could create something good and lasting. Homemaking was not just chores. It was an act of quiet healing, turning a lonely space into a home where a forsaken widow might finally belong. Each polished surface and fresh loaf felt like a small victory against the voices that had once called her unworthy. Over the next 2 days, Willa continued her gentle transformation of the home. She washed and mended curtains, dusted every shelf, and even organized the pantry with neat rows of supplies. The ranch house smelled of soap, bread, and simmering stews. Silas watched her often from doorways or while working nearby, his stoic presence a constant, protective shadow. He spoke little, but his actions, repairing a loose cupboard door she had pointed out, or bringing her a cup of coffee while she worked, spoke of growing respect. The children, Elias and Clara, grew bolder they kept hot each passing hour. Clara helped Willa fold linens, her small hands mimicking the older woman's movements. Elias followed Silas around but often returned to the kitchen, drawn by Willa's quiet kindness. These small interactions planted seeds of reluctant motherhood in Willa's heart, though she tried not to dwell on it too deeply yet. By the third afternoon, the house felt truly lived in and cared for. The specific scent of lemon and fresh bread lingered like a comforting embrace. Willa stood in the center of the main room, surveying her work with quiet satisfaction, her full figure tired, but her spirit lighter than it had been in months. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the polished floors, Silas entered the house and sat at the kitchen table. His blue eyes met hers with unusual seriousness. He murmured in his deep voice, "Word came today. Your kin will be here the day after tomorrow." They mentioned the arrangement again. Willa's hands paused in their work. Before she could find words to respond, young Clara's voice carried from the hallway, hesitant and innocent. "Miss Willa, the other hand said Uncle Silas only sent for you because it was a cruel joke the town made. Is that true? Are you going to leave when they come?" The child's words landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples of unresolved pain and uncertainty that spread through the warm kitchen. Willa's heart clenched as she looked toward the hallway, the home she had so carefully built, suddenly feeling fragile once more. The cruel joke had now been spoken aloud by a child, threatening everything she had begun to hope for on this ranch. The child's innocent question hung heavy in the warm kitchen, like a storm cloud rolling over the prairie. Willa's hands stilled on the edge of the table, her full figure going rigid as the words sank deep into her chest. Clara's wide eyes looked up at her with genuine confusion, while young Elias peeked from behind his sister's skirt, both children waiting for an answer that could shatter the fragile home she had begun to build. Silas moved with deliberate calm, his massive frame crossing the room in 2 long strides. His subtle character behavior was protective and grounding. He placed one large hand gently on Clara's shoulder, drawing the children close to his side without a word, creating a small circle of safety in the middle of the unfolding pain. Before Willa could find her voice, the sound of approaching horses carried through the open window. The specific sensory moment hit her powerfully as the sharp scent of dust, kicked up by hooves mixed with the lingering aroma of fresh bread and lemon oil, turning the comforting kitchen smells into something suddenly bitter and uncertain. 2 ranch hands rode up, accompanied by a pair of townsmen from the nearby settlement. Their voices carried loudly across the yard, full of cruel mockery that made Willa's scarred cheek burn with fresh shame. "Well, look at that." One of the townsmen sneered loudly enough for the words to drift clearly inside. The giant finally got himself that mail-order joke of a bride. Never thought he'd actually go through with our little bet. The other laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the peaceful afternoon. "Told you boys," he was desperate enough to send for the biggest, most scarred widow this side of the Mississippi. Figured it'd be good for a laugh when she showed up, and he sent her packing. Willa's heart twisted painfully. The cruel joke was now laid bare in the harsh light of day. The entire mail-order arrangement had started as a mocking wager by the townsfolk, a heartless prank aimed at the stoic mountain man who kept to himself. They had dared Silas to place the advertisement, betting he would follow through, and laughing at the idea of a forsaken woman like her arriving to be humiliated. In the quiet of her mind, a deep emotional reflection crashed over her like a cold wave. All the old insecurities rushed back with vicious force. Her big-sized body, the jagged scar running across her face, her status as a widow with no family to speak for her. Everything society had used to reject her was now the very punchline of their cruel jest. How could she have been foolish enough to believe this might be different? The slow-burn hope she had nurtured since stepping off the wagon now felt like it was crumbling beneath her boots. Silas's jaw tightened visibly, but his voice when it came was low and authoritative, a deep murmur that carried the weight of mountains. "Enough." The single word was short, powerful, and final. He stepped out onto the porch, his towering presence alone causing the men to fall silent mid-laugh. The giant cowboy did not raise his voice or make threats. His stoic authority was enough to make the townsmen shift uncomfortably in their saddles. Inside, Willa moved to the window, her hands trembling slightly as she watched. 3 small warmth beats fought against the cruelty unfolding outside. The first came when Clara slipped her small hand into Willa's, squeezing gently ve capite hot childlike trust. The second arrived as Elias moved to stand beside her, leaning his small body against her full hip in silent support. The third warmth beat bloomed when Silas glanced back over his broad shoulder toward the house, his piercing blue eyes finding hers for a brief moment. Steady, protective, and without a trace of the mockery that surrounded them. The men on horseback muttered excuses and eventually rode away. But the damage had been done. Silas returned inside, closing the door firmly behind him. He crossed to Willa and stopped a respectful distance away, his massive frame radiating quiet strength rather than pity. "They started it as a joke," he murmured, the words gravelly and honest. "The boys in town thought it funny to push me into placing that advertisement. Never expected anyone real to answer, especially not someone like you." Willa's hazel eyes filled with unshed tears, but she held them back with the same resilience that had carried her across the frontier. The emotional reflection deepened into a quiet ache. This revelation made the slow burn connection she felt with Silas feel tainted, yet his calm presence suggested the joke had long since stopped being funny to him. He continued softly, "But you here now. And the house, it feels different already." "Better, miss." The children stayed close to her side, their small warmth providing a gentle anchor. Willa managed a small nod, her scarred cheek catching the afternoon light streaming through the window. Despite the cruelty of the townsfolk, Silas' stoic protection and the children's innocent acceptance created tiny flickers of hope amid the pain. As evening approached, the ranch settled into an uneasy quiet. Willa prepared supper ve capite hot, heavy hands, her homemaking skills now feeling like both shield and reminder of why she had been chosen as the punchline. The scent of simmering stew filled the house once more, but it carried a bittersweet edge. Later that night, after the children were in bed, Silas found her on the porch again. The stars stretched endlessly above the prairie, but Willa's heart remained troubled by the unveiled jest and the arrival of her kin looming on the horizon. just as Silas opened his mouth to speak more. The distant sound of another wagon could be heard approaching the ranch road under the moonlight. His massive shoulders tensed. In a low murmur, he said, "They early. Your family is here." The sudden revelation sent a fresh wave of unresolved tension through Willa's entire being. Her betrayers from blood had arrived sooner than expected, and now they would step into a home where the cruel joke had already been laid bare for all to see. The heavy wagon wheels crunched over the dry gravel of the ranch road, the sound growing louder in the still night air. Lantern light from the porch cast long, flickering shadows as the vehicle came to a stop in front of the house. Willa stood just inside the doorway, her heart pounding heavily against her ribs, the jagged scar on her cheek feeling tight and hot under the tension. Two figures climbed down from the wagon, her older brother, Harlan, and his wife, Maud. Their faces were pinched with the same familiar disdain she had fled months earlier. The specific sensory moment struck her as a cold prairie wind whipped across the yard, carrying the sharp, musky scent of tired horses mixed with the faint, familiar perfume Maud always wore, too sweet and out of place on the frontier. Well, Harlan sneered loudly, his voice carrying across the yard. Look what the mail order joke dragged in. Still as big as ever. I see. Willa. That scar hasn't improved none either. Maud let out a sharp, mocking laugh. We came as soon as we heard. Could believe you actually went through with this fool arrangement. Nah. The whole town back home is laughing about the giant cowboy and his pitty bride. Willa's hands clenched at her sides, her full figure feeling exposed under their cruel gazes. The old wounds of betrayal by blood ripped open once more. Silas moved then. His towering frame stepped forward from the porch with deliberate, unhurried authority. His subtle character behavior was powerful in its simplicity. He positioned his massive body directly between Willa and her family, creating a living shield of muscle and stoic presence that made Harlan and Maud take an involuntary step back. That's enough, Silas murmured, his deep voice low but carrying the weight of thunder. The words were short, powerful, and left no room for argument. Harlan tried to laugh it off. Come now, big man. We just speaking the truth. Everyone knows this was a cruel joke the boys in town played on you, sending for the most unfortunate widow they could find. You don't have to pretend in front of us. Silas did not raise his voice. He simply stood taller, his broad shoulders squared, his piercing blue eyes steady and unblinking. The quiet authority radiating from him was more intimidating than any shout could ever be. This is my ranch. Willa is here by my choice. You will speak to her with respect or you will leave. In the quiet of her mind, a deep emotional reflection washed over Willa. For the first time in years, someone was publicly standing between her and the cruelty she had endured from her own blood. The giant cowboy's protection felt like a warm light cutting through years of darkness and mockery. 3 small warmth beats followed in quick succession. First, young Clara and Elias slipped out of the house and moved to stand on either side of Willa, the children's small bodies pressing gently against her full figure in silent solidarity. The second warmth came when Silas glanced back over his shoulder at her, his expression softening for the briefest moment, with quiet reassurance. The third bloomed when one of the ranch hands, who had come to see the commotion, gave a respectful nod toward Silas and stayed nearby, showing quiet support for his boss' decision. Maud crossed her arms, her voice turning sharper. Respect. For her. She has been a burden on our family long enough. We only came to make sure you weren't being taken advantage of by this oversized charity case. Silas' jaw tightened. But his voice remained calm and authoritative. She's brought more care to this home in a week than Mott V. seen in years. You will not speak ill of her here. The confrontation stretched on for several long minutes, Harlan and Maud throwing more barbed comments about Willa's appearance, her past, and the joke that had brought her to the ranch. Each time Silas' stoic shield held firm, his massive presence, and few powerful words forcing them to back down. Willa felt a fragile hope stirring beneath the pain. Perhaps the cruel joke was truly turning into destiny under the protection of this silent giant. As the argument began to wind down, Harlan pulled an envelope from his coat pocket with a cruel smile. Before we leave, there's something you should know, big man. The real reason we encouraged her to answer that advertisement. The sudden revelation hung in the cold night air, unresolved and heavy with new tension. What final secret from her blood family was about to be revealed? And would Silas' protection hold when the full truth came to light? The lantern light flickered across Harlan's smug face as he held the envelope out toward Silas, the paper trembling slightly in the prairie wind. The real reason we encouraged her to answer that advertisement, he began, his voice thick with cruel satisfaction. Silas's enormous hand moved with surprising speed, plucking the envelope from Harlan's fingers before the man could finish. Not tonight, the giant cowboy murmured, his tone low, authoritative, and final. He tucked the envelope deep into his vest pocket without glancing at it, his broad shoulders squared like a mountain that would not be moved. Harlan and Maud sputtered protests, their faces twisting with frustration, but Silas simply turned his back on them, guiding Willa and the children back inside with one protective sweep of his arm. The wagon wheels crunched away into the darkness moments later, leaving only the echo of hooves and the quiet night air. Inside the kitchen, the specific sensory moment wrapped around them as Willa stirred the last of the evening stew on the stove. The rich, savory scent of slow-simmered beef, carrots, onions, and herbs rose in gentle curls of steam, mingling with the faint wood smoke from the hearth and chasing away the bitter chill of the confrontation outside. It filled the room like a quiet promise of safety, a small defiance against the cruelty that had just rolled away down the ranch road. Willa's hands moved steadily despite the faint tremble in her fingers, ladling bowls for the children first. Her full figure cast a soft, rounded shadow across the pine table as she worked, the apron strings tied snugly around her wide hips. In the quiet of her mind, a deep emotional reflection stirred, gentle yet profound. These two small souls, Silas' orphaned niece and nephew, had already lost so much in their short lives. Now they watched her with kept hot, wary eyes, the same cautious gaze the world had given her, since the scar and her size had marked her as different. Would they see only what her blood family had seen, or could they glimpse the heart beneath? Clara and Elias sat at the table, their young faces still carrying traces of the tension from the porch. At first their eyes followed Willa with kept hot hesitation, the wary curiosity of children who had learned early that the world could take away what it gave. Clara's small fingers twisted the edge of her napkin, Elias Capete glancing toward the door, as if expecting more harsh voices to return. Silas settled into his chair at the head of the table, his massive frame making the sturdy oak creak softly. His subtle character behavior spoke volumes. He ate in silence, but his piercing blue eyes kept drifting between Willa and the children, a quiet encouragement that needed no words. The giant cowboy's stoic presence remained a steady anchor, allowing the moment to unfold without pressure. 3 small warmth beats unfolded like petals in the lamplight. The first came when Clara, after taking a hesitant spoonful of stew, murmured, "It tastes warm like home." The simple words carried a child's honest surprise. The second arrived as Elias pushed his empty bowl forward with kept both hands, his voice small but hopeful. "More, please?" A tiny smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The first Willa had truly seemed directed at her. The third warmth beat bloomed softer still, when Clara reached out and lightly touched the back of Willa's hand as she refilled the bowl. her small fingers lingering a moment on the older woman's skin, as if testing whether this scarred, big-sized widow was real and kind. As the meal continued, the children's wary gazes slowly began to shift. They noticed the little things. How Willa remembered Elias liked extra carrots, and how she cut Clara's bread into the small triangles the girl preferred. They saw the way her hazel eyes softened when she smiled at them, the jagged scar pulling gently, yet never hiding the quiet resilience beneath. Her big-sized frame, so often mocked by the world, moved with a gentle, capable grace as she cleared plates and poured fresh milk, turning the simple supper into something that felt safe and whole. Willa felt the slow recognition building in their young hearts. The children were beginning to see beyond the scar that society had used to brand her unworthy, beyond the size that had made her the punchline of cruel jokes. They were starting to see her true worth. The golden heart that poured love into every small task. The steady hands that had already brought order and warmth to this lonely ranch house. Later, after the bowls were cleared, the children lingered instead of rushing off. Clara helped carry the empty dishes to the basin, her small steps matching Willa's rhythm. Elias hovered nearby, watching as Willa wiped the table with careful strokes. Silas remained at the table, his silent observation, a protective shield that let the moment breathe. The children's initial wariness softened further when Willa knelt to their level, her full figure settling comfortably on the floorboards, and showed Clara how to fold a simple cloth napkin into a little boat, just as her own mother had once taught her. Elias laughed softly when the napkin sailed across the table, the sound pure and unguarded. In that quiet kitchen, the slow burn healing deepened. The orphaned children who had grown guarded after losing their parents began to lean into Willa's presence. Clara rested her head briefly against Willa's shoulder while they sat by the fire, and Elias climbed into the chair beside her, sharing a story about a baby calf he had helped feed that morning. Their wary eyes now held curiosity and the first glimmers of trust, recognizing the woman before them, not as the forsaken widow from a cruel joke, but as someone who saw them, cared for them, and asked for nothing in return. Silas watched it all without interrupting. His massive frame relaxed in the firelight. The subtle warmth of his approval lingered in the air, unspoken yet felt by everyone in the room. As bedtime approached, Willa tucked the children in, her hands smoothing blankets, with the same gentle care she had shown the ranch house itself. Clara's voice came soft in the dim lamplight. "Miss Willa, you re not like what they said. You make things better." Elias nodded from his bed across the room, adding in a sleepy murmur, "Stay with us." The words wrapped around Willa's heart like the prairie wind on a warm day, stirring the reluctant pull of motherhood she had tried to keep at bay. Yet as she rose to leave the room, Elias suddenly sat up, his young eyes wide with innocent honesty. "Uncle Silas took that envelope, the one your family brought. If it is something bad, will you still want to be here, even if it changes everything?" The question lingered in the quiet bedroom, an unresolved emotional tension that tightened the air between them. The mysterious envelope from her blood family remained unopened in Silas's pocket, its contents a shadow hanging over the budding trust the children had just begun to offer. Willa's heart clenched with the weight of what secrets it might hold, wondering if this fragile new worth the children were seeing in her could survive whatever truth waited inside that folded paper. Willa's heart clenched with the weight of what secrets it might hold, wondering if this fragile new worth the children were seeing in her could survive whatever truth waited inside that folded paper. She knelt there between the two small beds, her full figures settling onto the worn floorboards with a soft creak, the lamplight casting gentle shadows across her scarred cheek. The question from Elias hung between them, simple and piercing, and she searched for words that would not frighten them further. Silas appeared in the doorway, then, his towering frame filling the space without crowding it. His subtle character behavior was one of quiet guardianship. He leaned one broad shoulder against the jamb, arms crossed over his barrel chest, saying nothing yet offering the steady presence that allowed her to breathe. The envelope remained tucked in his vest pocket, untouched, as if he sensed the moment belonged first to her and the children. In the quiet of her mind, a deep emotional reflection stirred, hesitant and layered with old pain. Motherhood had once been a distant dream shattered by the carriage accident that took her husband and left her barren in more ways than one. She had loved fiercely in that short marriage, only to lose everything, including the chance to hold a child of her own. Now these two small souls, orphaned and wary, pulled at something deep inside her, a reluctant tug she feared to name. What if she opened her heart and lost them too? What if her sighs, her scar, her forsaken past proved too much once the envelope's secrets spilled out? The pull toward them felt both warm and terrifying, like reaching for a lantern in a storm. The specific sensory moment came as she smoothed the quilt over Clara's legs, the soft, worn fabric carrying the faint, clean scent of the lavender she had tucked into the linen's chest days earlier. It mingled with the children's own sleepy smell of soap and prairie grass from their afternoon play, wrapping the room in a gentle, homey hush that made her throat tighten. 3 small warmth beats followed like embers glowing in the hearth. The first bloomed when Clara, sensing Willa's hesitation, reached up and traced one small finger lightly along the edge of the jagged scar on Willa's cheek, not with fear, but with wide-eyed curiosity. "Does it hurt anymore?" the girl whispered, her touch feather soft and trusting. The second arrived as Elias scooted to the edge of his bed and leaned his small head against Willa's shoulder, his voice muffled but earnest. "We like when you tuck us in. Makes the dark feel smaller." The third warmth beat unfolded more quietly, when Clara slipped her hand into Willa's larger one and squeezed, murmuring, "Stay a little longer tonight? Tell us about the stars outside." Willa swallowed hard, the reluctant pull toward motherhood swelling in her chest despite the fear. She told them a simple story then, her voice low and steady, about the constellations her own mother had once pointed out on clear prairie nights. The children listened with rapt attention, their young faces softening further, the wariness from earlier days giving way to something tender and new. Clara's eyes grew heavy with contentment, and Elias yawned widely, his small body relaxing fully against Willa's side, as if he had waited months for such safety. She lingered longer than she planned, the bond deepening in small, tentative ways. When Clara asked for another blanket, Willa fetched it without hesitation, tucking it around the girl's shoulders with the same careful hands that had polished the ranch house into a home. Elias, growing bolder, shared a whispered secret about a baby rabbit he had seen near the barn that morning, his words tumbling out as though testing whether she would truly listen. Willa did, nodding gravely, her hazel eyes warm with genuine interest. The slow burn connection between them felt like fragile shoots pushing through hard soil, tentative yet determined, pulling her heart forward, even as old fears whispered warnings of loss. Silas remained in the doorway the whole time, his massive frame a silent sentinel. He did not interrupt, only watched with those piercing blue eyes that seemed to understand the battle inside her. The giant cowboy's stoic presence gave her space to navigate this reluctant pull, neither pushing her toward the children nor pulling her away. It was enough to let the moment breathe, to let the warmth of reluctant motherhood settle without demands. As the children's breathing evened into sleep, Willa rose slowly, her full figure moving with quiet grace. She paused at the threshold beside Silas, the hallway lamp throwing soft light across them both. The envelope in his pocket felt heavier now, an unspoken shadow, yet he made no move to open it. Instead, his large hand brushed lightly against hers, a fleeting, grounding touch that sent another unexpected wave of reassurance through her. They stepped into the kitchen together, where the fire had burned low. Willa busied herself with the last of the evening chores, washing the supper dishes in warm water that soothed her hands. The reluctant maternal ache lingered, mingling with joy at the children's growing trust and terror that it could all slip away. She had begun to imagine small futures here, teaching Clara to bake bread, helping Elias gentle his first pony, becoming the steady presence these orphans so clearly needed. Yet the fear of more loss, of being torn away like everything else she had loved, kept her heart guarded even as it opened. Silas poured 2 cups of coffee and set one before her without a word, his subtle character behavior once again speaking of care. They sat across from hot other at the table, the quiet stretching comfortably. Willa felt the slow burn of something deeper forming, not just with the children, but with this silent protector, who made space for her hesitant heart. Outside, the prairie night pressed close, stars glittering above the distant ranch gates. Willa glanced toward the window, her thoughts drifting to the envelope, still hidden in Silas's vest. She murmured softly, "Whatever is in that letter, don't want the children hurt by it. They've already lost so much." Silas nodded once, his deep voice a low murmur. "We face it together. When you ready." The words offered comfort, yet as the clock on the mantel ticked past midnight, a soft knock sounded at the front door. Too late for any ranch hand. Silas rose, his massive frame alert, and opened it to reveal one of the older townsmen from days earlier, hat in hand and expression uneasy under the lantern glow. The man shifted on the porch, glancing past Silas toward Willa before speaking in a hushed tone. "Got word from the telegraph office in town," he said, voice carrying just enough for her to hear. "Your kin wired ahead. That envelope they left, it ain't just words. They sent proof of something that could change the whole arrangement. Legal papers, saying the children's guardianship might not be as settled as you thought." The sudden revelation landed like a cold gust through the open door, twisting the reluctant warmth in Willa's chest into fresh tension. The envelope's secret now threatened not only her place here, but the very children she had begun to love, leaving the budding bond of reluctant motherhood hanging unresolved in the midnight air. The sudden revelation about the envelope and legal papers threatening the children's guardianship hung in the midnight air, like a gathering storm on the horizon. Willa stood in the kitchen doorway, her full figure framed by the warm lamplight spilling out onto the porch, her heart twisting hot, fresh fear for Clara and Elias. The townsman shifted uncomfortably, under Silas' steady gaze, delivering the message in a hushed tone, before tipping his hat and retreating into the darkness, his horse's hooves fading quickly down the ranch road. Silas closed the door with deliberate quiet, the heavy latch clicking like a final seal against the outside world. His massive frame turned back toward her, and in that moment, he made the choice that would change everything. Without a word, he reached into his vest pocket, withdrew the unopened envelope, and placed it on the table between them. Then, with a subtle character behavior that spoke of profound sacrifice, he crossed the room to the old oak cabinet in the corner, the one that held his most private mementos, and unlocked it with a small key he kept on a leather cord around his neck. He had never opened this cabinet for anyone before, not even the ranch hands, who had worked beside him for years. Inside lay the fragile remnants of his isolated life, faded letters from his late sister, the children's only remaining parent, a single silver locket containing a miniature portrait of his brother-in-law, and the worn deed to the ranch itself, which he had guarded like a sacred trust, since inheriting the land as a young mountain man seeking solitude after his own losses. He lifted the deed and the locket with those enormous, calloused hands, setting them gently beside the envelope. "It's time," he murmured, his deep voice low and gravelly, carrying the weight of mountains yielding ground. This was his sacred sacrifice, the deliberate opening of his carefully guarded world, the one he had built in deliberate isolation to shield his heart from further pain. By inviting Willa fully into it, by risking the vulnerability of shared secrets and shared burdens, he was laying down the last walls of his solitary fortress for her and the children. In the quiet of her mind, a deep emotional reflection washed over Willa as she watched him. She had come here as a forsaken widow seeking only work, her big-sized frame and scarred face already marked by betrayal and mockery. Yet this giant cowboy was choosing to sacrifice his hard-won solitude, opening the most private corners of his life not out of duty, but out of a quiet, deepening care that made her chest ache with something tender and new. How many men would risk their carefully built isolation for a woman society had deemed unworthy? The reluctant motherhood she felt toward Clara and Elias now intertwined with a slow burn warmth toward Silas himself, pulling her heart forward even as fear whispered of what the papers might reveal. The specific sensory moment arrived as Silas poured fresh water into the kettle and set it on the stove, the soft hiss of steam soon rising with the clean mineral scent of the ranch's deep well water, mingling with the faint, lingering aroma of lavender from the children's room. It filled the kitchen like a gentle benediction, turning the late-night hour into something almost holy, a space where truths could be faced without the world's cruelty pressing in. 3 small warmth beats unfolded in the lamplight. The first came when Silas pulled out a chair for Willa with one large hand, waiting until she sat before taking his own place across from her, his towering frame folding carefully so as not to intimidate. The second bloomed as he slid the locket across the table toward her, opening it to reveal the tiny portrait inside and murmuring, "My sister's family, the children's parents. Mort que pete this hidden so no one could take what little they had left." The third warmth beat arrived softer still when he reached over and covered her hand with his own for a brief, grounding moment, the calloused warmth of his palm speaking of protection and promise without a single extra word. Together, they opened the envelope under the steady glow of the lantern. The papers inside were legal documents from a distant lawyer sent at her blood family's urging, claims that the children's guardianship could be challenged if Silas remained unmarried, citing his reclusive nature and the unstable influence of an unvetted mail order arrangement. Harlan and Maud had hoped the cruel joke would drive Willa away, freeing them to petition for the children themselves and gain access to the small inheritance tied to the ranch through Silas's sister. The betrayal cut deep, yet Silas's calm resolve never wavered. He read the words aloud in his low murmur, then set the papers aside and looked at her directly, his piercing blue eyes steady. "They think they can take the young ones, use my isolation against me, but I won't let that happen." His sacred sacrifice deepened as he continued, voice gravelly with quiet determination. "We make this official, not for the papers, not for them, for the children, and for whatever this is becoming between us." He was offering more than marriage on paper. He was surrendering the last of his solitary life, inviting her and the children fully into his world, risking the vulnerability he had guarded for years. Willa felt the weight of it settle over her like a warm quilt on a cold night. The giant cowboy, who had chosen the mountains and silence to protect his heart, was now choosing to open every door for her sake. The slow burn connection between them grew stronger in that kitchen, no longer just protection or reluctant motherhood, but something sacred and shared. They talked long into the night, voices low and measured. Silas shared fragments of his own past losses. The sister and brother-in-law lost to fever, the decision to raise the children here in quiet isolation, rather than let the world's harshness touch them. Willa listened, her scarred cheek catching the light as she nodded, offering her own quiet strength in return. The reluctant pull in her heart toward Clara and Elias now felt anchored by his sacrifice, a foundation beginning to form beneath them all. As the first hints of dawn grayed the eastern sky beyond the windows, Silas stood and walked to the mantel. He took down the simple wooden box that held the ranch's original branding iron and a small velvet pouch. From the pouch he drew a plain gold band, his mother's wedding ring kept hidden all these years. He placed it in Willa's palm, the metal warm from his hand. "This was always meant for someone who could make this house a home again," he murmured. "Mort see that in you. If you look have it, we stand together at the altar in town, come Sunday. Not because of their papers. Because the children need us both. And Mort need you here." The words carried the depth of his sacred sacrifice, opening his isolated world completely, forever altering the solitary path he had walked for so long. Willa's fingers closed around the ring, her hazel eyes meeting his with quiet wonder. Yet before she could speak her answer, a soft cry came from the children's room. Clara calling out in a nightmare, her voice small and frightened. Elias's footsteps padded across the floorboards. Moments later, the boy appearing in the hallway with wide, worried eyes. "Miss Willa, Uncle Silas, the bad dreams came back," Clara whispered as they both entered the kitchen. rubbing sleepy eyes. About the wagon taking us away. Like the papers said. The children's innocent fear wrapped around the tender moment, turning the sacred promise into something suddenly fragile. Willa and Silas exchanged a glance, the unresolved tension of the legal threat, and the children's budding trust now pressing close, leaving the question of whether this new family could truly hold against the forces trying to pull it apart, still hanging heavy in the pale dawn light. The children's innocent fear wrapped around the tender moment, turning the sacred promise into something suddenly fragile. Willa knelt there in the pale dawn light, her full arms drawing Clara and Elias close against her soft, rounded figure. Their small bodies trembled from the nightmare, and she held them without hesitation, murmuring soft reassurances while Silas stood nearby, his towering frame a steadfast wall between them and the shadows of doubt. The giant cowboy did not speak at first. His subtle character behavior came as he lowered himself to one knee beside them, the floorboards groaning under his massive weight, and placed one enormous hand gently on Elias' back while the other rested near Willa's shoulder. It was not a grand gesture, only a quiet anchoring that let the moment breathe, allowing her reluctant heart to steady itself amid the fear of loss. In the quiet of her mind, a deep emotional reflection stirred as the children's breathing slowed. She had come to this ranch as a forsaken widow, her big-sized frame and scarred face already carrying the weight of mockery and betrayal. Now these two small souls clung to her, their wary eyes beginning to see her true worth, and Silas's sacred sacrifice, the opening of his isolated world, pulled her further into a future she had not dared imagine. The reluctant pull of motherhood tugged harder than ever, mingling with the slow burn warmth of his presence, yet the legal threat from the envelope still loomed like a distant thunderhead. The specific sensory moment arrived powerfully as the first rays of sunlight touched the kitchen table, warming the fresh loaves Willa had set out to cool overnight. The rich, golden scent of baked bread filled the room, carrying notes of yeast and a hint of honey from the wildflowers she had gathered the day before, wrapping them all in a comforting embrace that chased away the last traces of the nightmare. 3 small warmth beats followed, like gentle sparks in the hearth. The first bloomed when Clara lifted her head from Willa's shoulder and whispered, "You make the bad dreams go away," her small hand patting the older woman's arm with trusting affection. The second arrived as Elias wiped his eyes and leaned fully into Silas's side, murmuring, "Uncle Silas and Miss Willa together, like a real family." The third warmth beat unfolded softer still, when Clara reached up and adjusted the simple shawl around Willa's shoulders, as if trying to return the care she had received, her young face shining with quiet acceptance. The days that followed passed in a gentle rhythm of preparation and quiet strength. Willa threw herself into her homemaking with renewed purpose, her capable hands turning the ranch kitchen into a place of abundance. She baked tirelessly for the upcoming town auction, knowing it was more than a sale of goods. It was a chance to stand on her own merits, despite the cruel jokes that still echoed from the porch confrontation. Pies with flaky crusts, loaves studded vey capite hot, dried berries and jars of preserves filled the counters, each one a testament to her resilience. Sunday arrived under a wide blue sky, and the family rode into town together, the wagon wheels turning steadily over the dusty road. Silas sat tall on the driver's bench, his broad shoulders squared, the gold band now resting on Willa's finger like a quiet vow yet to be spoken aloud at the altar. The children nestled between them, their small hands occasionally brushing hers in silent reassurance. Willa felt the slow burn connection deepening vey capite hot every mile, the sacred sacrifice Silas had made giving her courage to face the townsfolk. At the auction grounds on the edge of the settlement, the air buzzed with voices and the scent of livestock and fried dough. Tables lined the square, laden with goods from local families. Willa set out her baked offerings with steady hands, her full figure moving with quiet dignity despite the stares that followed her scarred cheek and rounded form. The specific sensory moment deepened here as the warm prairie breeze carried the mingled aromas of her freshest pies from nearby fires, mingling with the distant lowing of cattle and the chatter of the crowd. The sneers came quickly, as expected. A cluster of townsmen near the bidding platform spotted her and laughed openly, their voices carrying on the wind. "Look at that." The giant S-mail order joke finally showed her face. One sneered loudly. "Bet those pies are as heavy as she is. Who'd pay good money for charity baking from the forsaken widow?" Another joined in, mocking her size and the jagged scar with cruel jabs that made heads turn. The whole county knows it started as a bet. Wonder how long before he sends her packing like the rest. Willa's cheeks burned, but she kept her chin lifted, her hazel eyes steady. In the quiet of her mind, the emotional reflection anchored her. These words were the same ones her blood family had hurled, the same rejections that had marked her life. Yet here she stood, her homemaking skills and quiet resilience, offering something real in a world quick to dismiss her. Silas remained at her side, his stoic presence a shield without words. He did not confront the mockers directly, only positioned his massive frame protectively near her table, his piercing blue eyes sweeping the crowd once. A subtle character behavior that spoke volumes and caused several of the louder voices to falter and drift away. The auctioneer began calling bids on the baked goods, starting with others before reaching Willa's table. Her pies and loaves drew hesitant looks at first, the crowd's cruelty lingering in muttered comments about the joke bride's handiwork. Yet as the first pie was sliced for sampling, something shifted. An older rancher took a bite, paused, and raised his eyebrows in genuine surprise. "This crust, light as a feather," he murmured to his wife, loud enough for nearby ears to hear. "Tastes like it was made with care, not haste." Word spread slowly at first, then with growing momentum. Women who had whispered behind their hands now stepped forward to taste the berry loaves, their expressions softening. "Never had one so moist and flavorful," one admitted, her voice carrying reluctant respect. The auctioneer noticed the shift and raised his gavel with new energy. Bids climbed steadily, higher than expected, until Willa's goods fetched prices that drew surprised murmurs from the entire square. Even the harshest skeptics fell quiet as her preserves sold out completely, the validation coming not in grand applause, but in the subtle nods and quiet purchases that proved her worth beyond the cruel jest. 3 small warmth beats bloomed amid the unfolding triumph. The first came when a young mother approached Willa directly after winning a pie, pressing a small jar of her own honey into her hands and whispering, "Thank you, from us, ve kep hut ate real homemaking looks like." The second arrived as Clara and Elias, who had stayed close, beamed up at her with proud smiles, Elias tugging her apron and murmuring, "They like it, Miss Willa. They really like it." The third warmth beat unfolded when Silas, watching from a short distance, caught her eye across the bustling square and gave a single, slow nod of deep approval. His massive frame relaxed in a way that spoke of quiet pride in the woman beside him. Willa felt the validation settle into her bones, like warm sunlight after rain. Her big-sized figure and scarred face had not defined her here, her hands and heart had. The reluctant motherhood she felt toward the children deepened as they stood proudly by her side, and the slow-burn bond with Silas Garoeve kept stronger in the public light of the town. As the auction wound down and the family prepared to head back to the ranch, Silas loaded the last of the empty baskets into the wagon. The children chattered happily about the day, their voices light with the joy of seeing Willa recognized. Yet just as they climbed aboard, one of the auctioneer's assistants hurried over, hat in hand, his expression uneasy. "Ma, Anne." "Mr. Silas," he said, voice low. A telegram came in during the bidding. From the lawyer handling the children's guardianship. It's marked urgent. Something about new papers arriving from Willa's kin that could force a hearing before the wedding on Sunday. The sudden revelation twisted through the warm afterglow of the auction triumph, casting a shadow over the validation she had just earned. The legal threat had followed them even here, leaving the future of their fragile family, and the altar promise waiting at week's end, hanging unresolved in the dusty town square. The family sat in stunned silence on the wagon bench, as the assistant's words faded into the afternoon bustle of the town square. Silas's jaw tightened, his massive hands gripping the reins a fraction tighter. But he said nothing until they were well clear of the crowds, and the prairie road stretched empty before them. Willa felt the plain gold band on her finger grow warm against her skin, a quiet anchor amid the rising storm of the telegrammist's threat. The children pressed close on either side of her, their small bodies seeking the comfort she had only Diuete begun to offer them, and she wrapped one arm around Iagze Hat without thinking, her full figure a soft shield against the uncertainty. Back at the ranch that evening, after the children were tucked into bed with extra stories to ease their worries, Silas and Willa sat at the kitchen table once more. The lantern cast a steady glow across the polished wood she had worked so hard to restore. He broke the silence first, his deep voice a low murmur. "We don't wait till Sunday. We go tomorrow." Simple at the little clearing by the ranch gates. Just us, the young ones, and the circuit preacher who was still in town. His words carried no hesitation, only the same authoritative calm that had protected her from the first day. The sacred sacrifice he had already made, opening his isolated world, now extended to this hurried promise, refusing to let the legal shadows from her blood family steal one more moment of healing. Willa's heart beat heavily in her chest. In the quiet of her mind, a deep emotional reflection unfolded, like the slow turning of prairie seasons. She had arrived here as a forsaken widow, mocked for her size, and the jagged scar that marked her face, betrayed by the very blood that should have sheltered her. Every cruel jest and closed door had taught her she was unworthy of belonging. Yet this giant cowboy was choosing her not as the punchline of a town wager, but as the woman who could bring light back to his home and to the children's lives. Standing at the altar, even a makeshift one, felt like salvation, a quiet path of healing where past wounds might finally begin to mend into something whole and shared. The reluctant motherhood stirring in her heart, the slow burn bond growing between them, all of it converged here in a single, heartfelt commitment that no telegram could erase. The next morning dawned clear and cool. They rode together in the wagon to the small clearing near the ranch gates, the preacher waiting beneath a spreading cottonwood tree with a simple wooden cross set upon a low table draped in white cloth. Wildflowers gathered by the children, prairie roses and bluebonnets, adorned the makeshift altar, their petals still dewy from the night's chill. The specific sensory moment wrapped around them as they stepped down from the wagon. A soft prairie breeze carried the sweet, earthy scent of crushed grass beneath their boots, and the faint, honeyed perfume of the wildflowers, mingling with the clean leather smell of Silas's vest and the distant hint of sagebrush on the wind. It filled Willa's lungs like a gentle benediction, turning the ordinary clearing into a sacred space where the vast sky above seemed to lean closer in quiet witness. Silas offered his arm, his subtle character behavior one of profound steadiness. He guided her forward, with the lightest touch, at the small of her back, his enormous hand, warm and sure through the fabric of her simple calico dress, as if to say the world's cruelty would not reach her here. The children walked ahead, Clara clutching a small bouquet and Elias holding the preacher's worn Bible ve capite, ha careful pride. The ceremony itself was brief and heartfelt, spoken in the preacher's gentle tones while the four of them stood together beneath the cottonwood's dappled shade. Silas spoke his vows first, his gravelly murmur carrying across the clearing, like distant thunder softened by distance. "More take you, Willa, to stand beside me through whatever comes, for the children, for the home you've made, for the healing we both need." His piercing blue eyes held hers without flinching, the stoic mountain man laying bare a quiet depth of care that needed no grand speeches. 3 small warmth beats bloomed in the simple exchange. The first came when Clara stepped forward and placed her bouquet of wildflowers into Willa's, hands whispering, "For you, so the scar does to feel so alone." The second arrived as Elias tugged at Silas's sleeve and then reached up to press a small, smooth stone he had found by the creek into Willa's palm, murmuring, "To make it official like a real family rock." The third warmth beat unfolded softer still when Silas, after the preacher pronounced them bound, rested his large hand briefly over hers where the gold band now sat, his thumb tracing the simple circle once in silent promise, the touch sending a wave of quiet belonging through her entire being. Willa spoke her own words then, voice steady despite the emotion swelling in her chest. "Mort take you, Silas, and these children, to build something true where there was only emptiness before. Mort promise my hands, my heart and my strength for as long as the prairie wind blows." The vows were not flowery, yet they carried the weight of every homemaking task she had performed, every protective moment he had offered, every reluctant maternal tug she had felt. The preacher smiled gently and closed the Bible, offering a short blessing that spoke of new beginnings, forged in quiet courage rather than grand circumstance. As they stood there, the small family circle complete beneath the open sky, Willa felt the altar promise settle into her bones like roots finding soil. The salvation it offered was not loud or showy. It was the slow, steady healing of two wounded hearts choosing exe other and the children, despite every cruel joke and legal shadow. Silas's towering frame beside her felt like the mountain he resembled, solid and unchanging, while the children's bright faces reflected the true worth they had already begun to see in her. The ranch gates loomed nearby, their weathered posts a silent witness to the new chapter unfolding. They lingered a moment longer, the preacher shaking hands and offering quiet congratulations, before mounting his horse to continue his circuit. Silas helped Willa back into the wagon with the same gentle care, his massive arms lifting the children up beside her as if they weighed nothing. The ride back to the house was peaceful, filled with the children's soft chatter about the flowers and the pretty words. Willa leaned lightly against Silas's shoulder, the slow burn connection between them, now sealed in something deeper than words or papers. Yet as the wagon crested the low rise overlooking the ranch house, a lone rider appeared on the distant road, spurring his horse hard toward them. The man wore the dust-streaked coat of a town clerk, and even from afar, Willa could see the official-looking envelope clutched in his hand. He reined up beside the wagon, breathing hard, and called out without dismounting. "Mr. Silas, Mrs. Willa, telegram DUAT came from the county judge. Your kin filed an emergency motion this morning. The hearing for the children's guardianship is set for tomorrow at noon, before any marriage can be recorded as legal. They reclaiming the ceremony today, Dante Count, without proper town witnesses and papers." The sudden revelation sliced through the warm afterglow of the altar promise, turning the fresh vows into something suddenly fragile and contested. The legal threat from her blood family had struck faster than anyone anticipated, leaving their newly sealed commitment, and the fragile family they had DUAT vowed to protect, hanging unresolved in the bright midday light. The rider's words about the emergency motion, and tomorrow's hearing cut through the bright midday light, like a sudden gust of cold wind off the prairie. Silas' massive frame remained utterly still on the wagon bench, rein steady in his enormous hands, but Willa felt the tension coil through him like a rope pulled taut. The children pressed closer to her sides, their small faces clouding with confusion once more, and she drew them in with gentle arms, her full figure a soft barrier against the fresh shadow falling over their new beginning. The clerk tipped his hat and spurred away, leaving only the echo of hooves and the heavy silence that followed. They finished the short drive back to the ranch house without speaking of it further. Silas unhitched the team with deliberate movements, his stoic presence a quiet anchor that kept the day from unraveling completely. Willa moved through the kitchen on instinct, her homemaking hands finding purpose in small, steady tasks, kneading dough for fresh biscuit, slicing apples for a simple cobbler, setting aside portions of the midday stew to simmer longer over an open fire. She knew the hearing tomorrow would test every fragile bond they had forged, but tonight she could still create something warm and lasting, a small hearth of memory beneath the stars. As dusk painted the sky in soft purples and golds, Silas carried the children's blankets and a few extra logs out to the clearing near the ranch house. Willa followed with a heavy basket, the specific sensory moment arriving powerfully as the first stars winked overhead and the night air filled with the rich, smoky scent of the campfire he built. Pine logs crackled and popped, releasing waves of resinous warmth that mingled with the sweet cinnamon and apple from the cobbler bubbling in the iron skillet she had nestled into the coals. The prairie wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the faint, earthy tang of sage and distant cattle, turning the ordinary yard into a private world wrapped in golden firelight. The children settled on the blankets, their young eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Clara leaned against Willa's side, while Elias poked at the fire with a long stick, sending sparks swirling upward like tiny stars of their own. Silas sat across from them, his towering frame folded onto the ground with surprising ease, back against an old log he had dragged close. His subtle character behavior spoke volumes in the quiet. He reached over without a word and adjusted the blanket around Willa's shoulders when the evening chill crept in, his large hand lingering just long enough to steady the fabric against her full figure before returning to tend the fire. In the quiet of her mind, a deep, emotional reflection stirred as the flames cast long shadows across the scarred side of her face. She had spent years believing her homemaking skills were only good for earning a meager living after betrayal by blood and the cruel jokes of strangers. Yet here, under this vast starry sky, those same hands had turned a simple campfire into a sanctuary. The biscuits she passed around on tin plates, the cobbler spooned warm into bowls. These small acts of care were weaving something deeper than survival. They were building connection, thread by golden thread, between a giant mountain man who had chosen solitude and a forsaken widow who had learned to expect rejection. The reluctant motherhood she felt for Clara and Elias, the slow burn bond with Silas sealed at the makeshift altar. All of it felt stronger in this gentle fire-lit circle, even as tomorrow's hearing loomed like an unseen storm. 3 small warmth beats unfolded like embers rising into the night. The first came when Clara took a bite of the apple cobbler and closed her eyes in pure delight, whispering, "It tastes like the best dream Moat ever had." The second arrived as Elias leaned forward and offered Silas the largest biscuit from his own plate, murmuring, "For you, uncle, because you make the fire so good." The third warmth beat bloomed softer still when Silas accepted it with a single nod, then broke the biscuit in half and handed the larger piece back to the boy, his piercing blue eyes warm in the fire glow, creating a silent exchange of care that needed no words. They lingered long after the meal, the fire crackling steadily as stories began to flow in low murmurs. Willa spoke first of her childhood on a smaller homestead farther east, how her mother had taught her to bake bread in a Dutch oven over open flames, and how the scent had always made the hardest days feel bearable. Silas listened without interrupting, his massive frame relaxed against the log, then shared fragments of his own mountain past. How he had learned to read the stars from his grandfather during long cattle drives, pointing out the constellations overhead with one thick finger. The children chimed in with their own small tales. Clara's memory of a baby calf she had helped name, Elias's excitement over the first wildflower he had picked for the altar that morning. The homemaking skills Willa had brought to the ranch continued to shine even here. She produced a small tin of honey from her basket and drizzled it over the last of the biscuits, turning simple fare into something special. She mended a loose thread on Elias's shirt by firelight, her needle moving with quiet precision, while Clara practiced braiding a length of spare rope, the way Willa had shown her earlier in the week. These small acts of care wove through the night, making the campfire feel less like a temporary shelter and more like the heart of a home that could weather any tomorrow. Silas's stoic presence provided the perfect contrast to the cruelty they had faced in town, where the mockers had sneered and whispered about the mail order joke. His short, powerful murmurs guiding the conversation back to lighter ground whenever a child's voice faltered with worry about the hearing. The extreme difference between the townspeople's sharp laughter and his authoritative calm created a pattern interrupt that let the family breathe, turning potential fear into tender connection. As the fire burned lower and the stars wheeled overhead, Willa felt the slow burn deepening between all of them. The reluctant pull of motherhood no longer frightened her quite so much. It felt rooted now, nourished by these starry nights and shared stories. Silas's sacred sacrifice in opening his world had made space for this, and her homemaking had given it warmth. The children's eyes grew heavy, their heads eventually resting in laps. the night wrapping them in a blanket of quiet healing. Silas added one last log, the flames leaping briefly before settling into a steady glow. He murmured, low, whatever comes at the hearing tomorrow, this stays. Us. Right here. His words carried the weight of mountains, yet left room for the uncertainty they all felt. Willa nodded, her hand finding his across the small space between them, the gold band catching the firelight. The connection felt real and unbreakable in that moment, forged campfire warmth and honest reflection. Yet as the children drifted toward sleep, a faint sound carried on the night wind from the direction of the ranch road. Hooves approaching slowly, deliberately. Silas' head lifted sharply, his massive frame tensing without rising. A single rider emerged from the darkness, lantern swinging low, and Willa recognized the outline of the same town clerk from earlier. The man reined up at the edge of the firelight, his face pale and troubled. Mr. Silas, Mrs. Willa. Moat rode back out, because the judge sent word after supper. Your kin wired again. They bringing a witness tomorrow. Someone claiming the whole mail order arrangement was never meant to be real, and that the children would be better off removed before any further complications. The sudden revelation dropped like a stone into the peaceful campfire circle, twisting the tender night's warmth into fresh, unresolved tension. The hearing now carried a new threat from an unknown witness, leaving their starry sky bond and the fragile family they had just celebrated suddenly hanging in the balance once more. The town clerk's lantern swayed in the darkness as he delivered the final warning about the witness, and the kin's renewed claims, then turned his horse and rode away, leaving only the crackle of the dying campfire and the heavy weight of his words settling over the small family circle. Willa sat motionless on the blanket, her full figure silhouetted by the fading orange glow, the gold band on her finger suddenly feeling heavier than the vows it represented. The children had stirred at the interruption, but now slept again, their small heads pillowed in her lap, while Silas remained across from her, his massive frame as still as the mountains he resembled. In the quiet of her mind, a deep emotional reflection crashed over her like a slow, relentless wave. The cruel joke that had brought her here, the town's mocking wager that had turned a simple advertisement into a punchline aimed at a scarred, big-sized widow, had never truly faded. It lingered in every sidelong glance from strangers, every whispered sneer she had overheard since her arrival. Her jagged scar pulled tight across her cheek as old doubts resurfaced with ite hot, vicious clarity. What if the witness tomorrow proved the arrangement was still just a heartless prank in the eyes of the law? What if her blood family's betrayal succeeded where the townsfolk's laughter had failed, stripping away the fragile home she had built with her hands and heart? Society had rejected her for years, first for the accident that marked her face, then for the size that made her an object of ridicule rather than a woman worthy of love. Even now, as the relationship with Silas deepened in these tender, slow-burn moments, the old voices whispered that she remained the forsaken punchline, unworthy of the children's trust or the giant cowboy's quiet devotion. The destiny the cruel joke had accidentally forged felt suddenly paper-thin, ready to tear at the first legal challenge. Silas' subtle character behavior broke gently into her turmoil. He rose without a sound, his towering build, moving with surprising care as he circled the fire and lowered himself beside her on the blanket. One enormous hand rested lightly on her shoulder, not pressing, not demanding, only present in that stoic way that had become her anchor. The touch was brief yet grounding, his calloused palm warm through the fabric of her shawl, offering silent permission for her doubts without rushing to dismiss them. The specific sensory moment arrived as the last log collapsed into glowing coals, sending a final wave of sweet pine smoke curling upward. It mingled with the lingering cinnamon apple scent from the cobbler tin, and the cool dew-kissed grass beneath them, creating a pocket of quiet comfort that wrapped around Willa's scarred face and full figure like a hesitant embrace from the prairie itself. The night air carried the faint, distant call of a nightjar, underscoring the vast emptiness beyond their small circle. 3 small warmth beats followed, fragile sparks against the inner storm. The first bloomed when Clara, half asleep, shifted in Willa's lap and murmured without opening her eyes, "Miss Willa, your stories make the dark feel safe," her small hand patting the older woman's arm in unconscious trust. The second arrived as Elias stirred briefly, pressing his cheek against her side and whispering, "You re not a joke to us," the innocent words slipping out like a balm he did not know she needed. The third warmth beat unfolded softer still when Silas, sensing the depth of her silence, reached into his vest and withdrew a small, worn leather pouch. From it, he drew a single prairie rose petal he had saved from the altar ceremony that morning, placing it gently in her palm without explanation, his quiet way of reminding her that the day's vows had been real, even if tomorrow tried to undo them. Willa closed her fingers around the petal, its soft texture a stark contrast to the hardened doubts inside her chest. The relationship with Silas had deepened slowly these past weeks, not in grand declarations, but in the steady accumulation of such moments. His protective stance at the auction, the sacred way he had opened his isolated world, the campfire stories shared under the stars. Yet the cruel joke turned destiny still haunted her. She wrestled with it now, the past scars, both the visible one on her cheek and the deeper ones from betrayal by blood, rising up to question everything. Could a woman marked by rejection truly become the steady heart of this family? Or would the townsfolk's laughter and her kin's legal maneuvers prove that some destinies were never meant to escape their mocking origins? Silas did not push her to speak. Instead, he added the last small stick to the coals, the flames leaping once before settling into a steady, low glow. His piercing blue eyes met hers across the short distance, steady and without pity, simply present. The slow burn connection between them felt tangible in that fire-lit quiet, a deepening bond forged, not despite her scars but around them, like roots growing around stone. Willa felt the reluctant motherhood she carried for the children intertwine. With this new layer of trust in him, yet the inner doubts persisted, whispering that tomorrow's hearing might expose her as the unworthy widow the world had always claimed. They sat together, long after the children's breathing evened into deep sleep, the campfire's warmth mirroring the quiet healing unfolding between them. Willa's homemaking instincts stirred even here. She reached into the basket and produced the last of the honey-drizzled biscuits, breaking one in half and offering the larger piece to Silas. He accepted it with a single nod, their fingers brushing in the exchange. A small, wordless acknowledgement of the shared night and the shared fight ahead. The gesture sent another wave of warmth through her, softening the edges of her reflection just enough to let her breathe. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, the prairie stretching vast and indifferent beyond the ranch fences. Willa leaned lightly against Silas's broad shoulder, the massive strength of him a living counterpoint to the cruelty she had known. The cruel joke that had started everything had twisted into something sacred. Yet she wrestled still, her heart torn between the deepening love she felt and the fear that societal rejection would once again claim victory. Silas murmured low, his voice gravelly and short, "Doubts come with the wind, they pass." It was enough, his authoritative calm a pattern, interrupt to her spiraling thoughts, allowing the slow burn to continue its gentle work. As the fire burned to embers and the night deepened, a faint rustle sounded from the direction of the barn, too deliberate for wind or wildlife. Silas' head lifted sharply, his massive frame tensing without rising. One of the ranch hands emerged from the shadows, lantern low, his face etched with unease. He approached the dying fire and crouched, voice hushed so as not to wake the children. "Boss Mrs. Willa," he whispered. "Just got word from town via the late rider. The witness your kin are bringing tomorrow. It's the original matchmaker who started the joke. He got signed statements claiming the whole advertisement was never serious, and he's ready to swear the children would be better off removed before any charity. Marriage takes hold." The sudden revelation dropped like a cold stone into the warm embers of the campfire, twisting Willa's inner doubts into sharp, unresolved tension. The cruel joke's architect was coming to testify, threatening to unravel everything they had slowly built, leaving the deepening bond between them and the family they had vowed to protect, hanging precariously on the edge of dawn. The ranch hand's warning about the matchmaker witness and his signed statements faded into the night, but sleep came fitfully for Willa. Dawn broke with a crisp edge, the family rising early to face the hearing in town. Yet before the wagon could even be hitched, a sharp crack split the morning quiet, the distant snap of a fence rail giving way near the east pasture. Cattle poured through the breach like a dark river, lowing in panic as they thundered straight toward the ranch house, where Clara and Elias played, near the porch steps. Dust rose in a choking cloud, hooves pounding the earth with sudden uncontrolled surge that threatened to overrun everything in its path. Willa's heart slammed against her ribs as she rushed outside, her full figure moving with surprising speed despite the layers of calico and apron. The children froze on the bottom step, eyes wide with terror. In the quiet of her mind, a deep emotional reflection surged through her like a cold prairie wind. This ranch crisis was more than broken wood and frightened livestock. It mirrored the chaos threatening their new life. The cruel joke that had once defined her arrival. No Obese felt like it was stampeding toward them again through the matchmaker's testimony, ready to trample the fragile family she had begun to cherish. Her scarred cheek burned with the old shame, yet the slow burn devotion she felt for Silas and the children anchored her, refusing to let fear win. Silas exploded into action without a shout or wasted motion. His subtle character behavior spoke louder than any command. He positioned his towering frame directly between the oncoming herd and the porch, arms spread wide in a commanding stance that used his massive presence as a living barrier. No panic crossed his face. Only stoic authority radiated from him as he whistled a sharp, piercing signal that cut through the thunder of hooves. The ranch hands came running from the barn, but Silas did not wait. He strode forward into the dust, his enormous boots planting firmly, voice a low, authoritative murmur that somehow carried over the chaos. Hold the line. Now. The specific sensory moment crashed over them all as the cattle surged closer. The thick, earthy scent of churned soil and frightened animals filled the air, mingled with the sharp tang of sweat and the faint sweetness of crushed prairie grass beneath pounding hooves. Dust stung Willa's eyes and coated her tongue. Yet in that swirling cloud she saw Silas's devotion made visible, his broad shoulders cutting a steady path through the storm. 3 small warmth beats bloomed even amid the danger. The first came when Clara, trembling on the steps, reached for Willa's hand and squeezed it tightly, whispering, "Uncle Silas, 1T, let them reach us." The second arrived as Elias, small fists clenched, called out in a brave voice, "We safe with you and Miss Willa." The third warmth beat unfolded when one of the ranch hands, arriving breathless, glanced at Silas, and then at Willa to had new respect, murmuring, "Never seen the boss move like that for anyone before. He's protecting what is his." The crisis drew unintended witnesses. Just as the lead steers veered under Silas's commanding presence, and the hands' coordinated efforts, a wagon rattled up the ranch road. The kin, Harlan and Maud, arriving early with the matchmaker witness in tow. Their faces twisted in surprise at the scene unfolding before them. Harlan sneered from the wagon seat, voice carrying cruelly across the yard. "Look at that. The giant playing hero for his joke bride. Won't he save you when the judge hears the truth tomorrow?" The matchmaker, a wiry man with a ledger in his lap, nodded smugly, already scribbling notes, as if the stampede itself proved the unstable nature of the household. Silas did not turn toward them. His protective devotion grew fiercer in the face of the public mockery. With short, powerful movements, he guided the last of the cattle back through the breach, his massive frame never faltering, even as dust coated his beard and vest. When one steer broke free and charged too close to the porch, Silas lunged with astonishing speed, throwing his full weight against the animal's shoulder and turning it away with nothing but raw strength and calm authority. The ranch hands followed his lead without question, forming a human wall that funneled the herd safely aside. The entire scene played out before the arriving antagonists, their cruel laughter dying into uneasy silence as they witnessed the giant cowboy's unwavering protection, not just of livestock, but of the woman and children who now stood as his family. Willa's heart swelled as she watched the public nature of his actions, right in front of the very people trying to tear them apart, deepened the slow burn bond between them. His stoic shield extended beyond private moments now. It stood bold and unyielding for all to see, turning the ranch crisis into a living declaration that she and the children were his to protect. The reluctant motherhood she carried for Clara and Elias felt stronger, rooted in this visible devotion, while the cruel joke that had once mocked their union now seemed smaller against the mountain of a man who refused to let it define them. Once the breach was secured and the cattle calmed, Silas walked back to the porch, his boots leaving deep prints in the dust. He stopped before Willa and the children, his piercing blue eyes sweeping over them with quiet care. Without a word he knelt, his towering frame lowering so he met the children at eye level, and brushed a smudge of dirt from Clara's cheek with one enormous, gentle thumb. The gesture was simple, yet it carried the weight of every protective choice he had made since Willa's arrival. Harlan and Maud climbed down from their wagon, the matchmaker trailing with his ledger, their voices rising again in mocking tones meant to undermine. "This little show won't matter in court," Maud sneered. "The witness here will prove it was all a cruel jest from the start. The judge will see the children need proper guardians, not this arrangement." Silas rose slowly, his massive presence once more stepping between his family and the antagonists. His voice remained low and authoritative, short and powerful. "This is my land, my family. You will not speak to them that way here." The words carried across the yard, heard by every ranch hand still catching their breath, turning the public confrontation into another layer of his protective devotion. The matchmaker faltered, pen hovering, while Harlan's sneer faltered under the giant Cowboy's unblinking gaze. The family drew closer. In that moment, the crisis and its public resolution, weaving their hearts tighter. Willa felt the emotional reflection settle into something warmer. Silas's devotion was not hidden or private anymore. It was a shield held high for the world to witness, proving the cruel joke had truly become destiny. Yet as the group prepared to head into town for the hearing, one of the ranch hands approached Silas kept a folded note, freshly delivered by a fast rider. The man's face was pale as he handed it over. Silas read it in silence, his jaw tightening visibly for the first time that morning. He passed the note to Willa without comment, the words stark on the page. The judge had advanced the hearing by 2 hours, and the matchmaker's full testimony, including new affidavits from her blood family claiming she was unfit due to her marked appearance and unstable background, would be presented first, before any defense could be offered. The sudden revelation twisted the hard-won warmth of the morning's protection into sharp, unresolved tension. The public shield Silas had just raised now faced its greatest test, leaving their deepening bond and the children's future hanging precariously on the edge of the courtroom doors. The wagon rolled toward town, with the kin and matchmaker following behind, their mocking presence a dark shadow in the rearview dust. Willa sat between Silas and the children, her full figure steady despite the knot in her stomach, the gold band on her finger catching the morning light like a quiet promise. The courthouse loomed small and plain under the wide prairie sky, yet it felt like the final gate they had to pass. Harlan and Maud sneered from their wagon as everyone filed inside, the matchmaker clutching his ledger with smug certainty. The hearing began in a hushed room, the judge gavel a sharp crack that made Clara and Elias flinch against Willa's sides. Silas stood tall beside her, his towering frame a silent wall. The matchmaker testified first, his voice oily as he recounted the cruel joke that had started the advertisement, waving affidavits from Willa's blood family, claiming her marked appearance made her unfit. Harlan and Maud nodded along, their sneers barely hidden, but then the judge turned to the children. Clara stepped forward first, her small voice clear and brave. "Miss Willa is the joke," she said, eyes fixed on Willa. "She makes the house smell like home and tucks us in so the dark feels safe." Elias followed, clutching Willa's hand. "She sees us. She's our mama now, not because of papers, but because she stayed when others left." The judge listened, his expression softening as the children spoke of the biscuits baked with extra honey for Elias, the stories told by the fire, the way Willa's scarred face smiled at them without pity. Silas' subtle character behavior spoke volumes. He simply placed one enormous hand on Willa's shoulder, steady and wordless. Letting the children's truth fill the room, the matchmaker faltered. Harlan tried one last sneer, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. In the end, the ruling came swift and clear. The guardianship stayed with Silas and Willa. The cruel claims dissolved under the weight of the children's honest words and the visible bond they had built. The family walked out together. The kin and matchmaker left sputtering in the hallway, their mockery finally silenced by living proof. The ride back to the ranch felt lighter, the prairie wind carrying away the last of the courtroom dust. Willa's heart swelled with quiet relief, yet the deepest healing waited at home. The specific sensory moment arrived as they stepped through the ranch house door. The rich, yeasty scent of the bread she had left, rising in the kitchen earlier that morning, now filled the air, warm and golden, mingling with the faint wood smoke from the banked hearth and the clean, sun-warmed smell of the children's clothes. It wrapped around them like an embrace, turning the ordinary house into a true sanctuary where old wounds could mend. In the quiet of her mind, a deep emotional reflection stirred as the afternoon light slanted through the windows. For so long she had believed the world's view of her, big-sized, scarred, forsaken, defined her worth. The cruel joke, the betrayal by blood, the mocking laughter in town had all carved deep grooves of doubt. Yet here, in the eyes of these two small souls, she saw something different. They saw her true worth. The steady hands that created order from chaos, the heart that loved without condition, the resilience that turned a lonely ranch into a home. The children's recognition healed something inside her she had not known was still bleeding, weaving her scars into a story of strength rather than shame. The family gathered in the kitchen, the slow afternoon stretching into golden hours of healing. 3 small warmth beats unfolded like petals opening to the sun. The first came when Clara climbed into Willa's lap at the table, her small arms wrapping around the older woman's soft middle in a full, trusting hug. "You are mama now," she whispered. The words simple and certain, her cheek pressed against Willa's apron. The second arrived, as Elias tugged Willa's hand and led her to the shelf where he kept his treasures, a smooth stone, a feather, and now a small drawing he had made of the 4 of them standing together under the ranch gates. "See," he murmured, pointing to the figure with the scar and the kind smile. "That's you, the best part." The third warmth beat bloomed softer and deeper still when both children, without prompting, began helping Willa with the evening chores. Clara, carefully folding napkins the way she had been taught. Elias carrying the small wood basket with proud determination. Each small task a silent declaration that they saw her not as the underdog widow, but as the heart of their family. Silas watched from the doorway, his massive frame relaxed against the frame, the stoic lines of his face softening in the warm light. He did not interrupt the moment, only nodded once when Willa glanced his way, his piercing blue eyes holding a depth of shared understanding. The children's full embrace of her true worth flowed through the house like the prairie breeze, healing old fractures in all of them. Clara no longer hesitated to share her fears. She told Willa about the nightmares that had eased since the altar day. Elias, who had once watched her with wary curiosity, now chattered freely about his day, seeking her opinion on everything from pony names to the best way to braid rope. Their young hearts, once guarded after losing their parents, opened completely, recognizing in Willa the steady, golden-hearted presence they had longed for. The healing deepened as the sun dipped lower. Willa prepared a simple supper, her homemaking hands moving with new lightness. The children set the table together, their laughter filling the kitchen in a way it never had before. They spoke of future days, teaching Clara to ride, helping Elias with his first garden patch, planning a Christmas vacation, real presents and stories by the fire. Each word wove the family tighter, the children's acceptance erasing the last shadows of the cruel joke and the legal threat. Willa felt the reluctant motherhood she had carried so hesitantly bloom into something full and certain, rooted in the pure trust shining in their eyes. Silas joined them at the table, his authoritative presence now gentle and integrated, the giant cowboy fully part of the circle rather than its distant protector. The meal passed in easy murmurs, the bond between all 4 of them glowing warmer than the lantern light overhead. The children's complete embrace of Willa's worth had healed not only her, but the quiet fractures in Silas too, turning their slow burn connection into something enduring and whole. As twilight settled over the ranch, the family stepped outside together, the children skipping ahead toward the barn to check on the new calf. Silas walked beside Willa, his large hand brushing hers in that subtle, grounding way. The healing felt complete in the soft evening air, the children's voices carrying back to them like music. Yet as they reached the edge of the yard, Silas paused, his massive frame turning toward the ranch gates in the distance. His voice came low and murmured, carrying a quiet weight. "There's something more need to show you at the gates. Tonight. It's been waiting since the day you arrived." His blue eyes held hers, steady yet laced with something deeper, as if the final piece of their new beginning rested there. Before Willa could ask what he meant, a soft glow appeared far down the ranch road, lantern light from an approaching rider moving slowly but deliberately toward them. The children noticed it too, their playful steps slowing as the figure drew nearer, the unresolved question of what waited. At the gates, now joined by this unexpected nighttime visitor, leaving the perfect healing of the day suddenly edged with fresh, tender mystery. The lantern light drew closer through the gathering twilight, revealing not an adversary but old Mr. Jenkins, the circuit preacher, who had performed their simple ceremony days earlier. His face was warm with a gentle smile as he reined up, holding a folded document. "Judge sent this out special," he said, voice carrying softly on the evening breeze. "Official copy of the guardianship ruling. It's final. It's no more challenges. You two and the young ones are a family in the eyes of the law and the Lord." The relief that washed over the small family was profound. Silas accepted the paper with a single nod, his massive hand briefly resting on the preacher's shoulder in quiet gratitude. The kin's last attempts had failed completely. The cruel joke had truly transformed into destiny, and the children's future was now secure. Mr. Jenkins offered a few more words of blessing, then rode on into the night with a wave, leaving the prairie quiet once more. Silas turned to Willa, his piercing blue eyes holding a quiet intensity. "Come with me to the gates," he murmured. "It's time." They walked together as the sun dipped below the horizon, the children skipping ahead with lanterns of their own, their laughter light and free. The specific sensory moment arrived as they approached the tall ranch gates. The rich, earthy scent of freshly cut wood and new paint mingled with the cool prairie grass and the faint, sweet aroma of wildflowers that still bloomed along the fence line. The air felt alive with possibility, the wooden posts standing tall against the deepening twilight sky, every breath carrying the promise of roots sinking deep into new soil. Silas stopped before the gates, his towering frame casting a long shadow. His subtle character behavior spoke of deep emotion. He reached up with one enormous hand and gently pulled away a heavy canvas covering that had been draped over the arch. Beneath it gleamed a brand new sign carefully carved and painted in bold, elegant letters. At the top it read "Forever" in strong, flowing script. Below it, the ranch name now proudly displayed both of their names, Blackwood Ranch, Silas and Willa. He turned to her, his deep voice a low, heartfelt murmur that carried the weight of every quiet moment they had shared. "Forever," Silas said, the single word spoken directly to the forsaken widow who had become his wife, his partner, and the heart of his home. "This land has been mine for years. Now it's ours. You made it a home. You made us a family." In the quiet of her mind, a deep emotional reflection filled Willa completely. The big-sized widow with the jagged scar, once mocked and betrayed by her own blood, had found her true place. The cruel joke had become the most beautiful destiny. The reluctant motherhood had blossomed into full, unconditional love for Clara and Elias. The slow-burn romance with this giant, stoic mountain man had become something eternal, rooted deep in the prairie soil. Her scars, once symbols of rejection, now told a story of resilience and the power of quiet love. Every homemaking touch, every protective stance, every campfire story had led them here, to this moment beneath the new sign that declared their shared future without shame or doubt. 3 small warmth beats bloomed in that sacred moment at the gates. The first came when Clara ran forward, and threw her arms around Willa's full waist, whispering, "Our name is there too. We all together forever." The second arrived as Elias tugged at Silas' vest and then reached for Willa's hand, placing his small palm in hers and saying, "You fixed everything, Mama Willa." The third warmth beat unfolded as Silas pulled Willa close with one powerful arm, his other hand resting on the children's shoulders, creating a circle of four beneath the new sign, his stoic heart fully open, his protective love now openly declared for all time. They lingered long under the star-filled sky, the lantern light dancing across the carved letters. The children chattered happily about painting their own handprints on the post someday, their young voices full of plans for the seasons ahead. Spring calves, summer picnics, autumn harvests, winter firesides. Silas's massive frame stood solid beside Willa, his quiet presence the foundation they had all come to trust. The ranch gates, once a threshold of uncertainty for a forsaken widow arriving with nothing but hope, now welcomed them home as one unbreakable unit. The public protection he had offered in town, the sacred sacrifice of opening his isolated world, the children's recognition of her true worth, the validation at the auction, the altar promise, and every small homemaking act had converged here in this single beautiful declaration. The night deepened softly around them. Crickets sang their steady song, and a gentle breeze stirred the grass like a lullaby. Willa leaned into Silas's side, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing match her own. The giant cowboy had not only shielded her from cruelty, he had built a forever with her, turning every wound into strength. The family turned back toward the house together, lanterns swinging, the new sign glowing behind them like a beacon. No more shadows from the past, no more cruel jokes, only the quiet, enduring promise of a life woven from resilience, protection, and love. As they crossed the threshold of the ranch house once more, the children raced ahead to light the lamps, their footsteps light with joy. Silas paused at the door, his large hand covering Willa's where it rested on the frame. He murmured one last time, the word carrying across the years they would share, forever. And in the warm glow spilling from the windows, the slow burn story of the giant cowboy and the underdog widow reached its beautiful, heartfelt close. A new beginning written not in fleeting words but carved deep into the very gates that had first welcomed her home. And so the tale ends beneath those no-say-hot gates, the way every true frontier story should, slow, steady, and full of quiet hope. The giant cowboy and the forsaken widow did not find an easy road, but they forged one together, turning mockery into meaning, scars into strength, and a lonely spread of prairie into a forever home. If this story of second chances and whispered vows touched something in your own heart, remember that new beginnings often arrive in the most unexpected places, just like a simple advertisement and a towering man who chose to stay. May your own forever find you when you least expect it, wrapped in the same gentle light that now shines over Blackwood Ranch. Thank you for listening to this fireside memory. This is a fictional, family-safe PG story created for entertainment only. All characters, events, and situations are imaginary. The narrative strictly follows wholesome YPP guidelines with no graphic violence, gore, or adult content, focusing solely on healing, protection, and heartwarming romance.